I was standing on my own wedding dance floor when my own family turned my happiest day into an absolute nightmare. In front of 100 staring guests, my brother Pierce lost his mind, grabbed me violently by my bridal hair, and slammed me straight onto the hard wooden floor just because I refused to sign my boutique over to him. My parents stood right over me, defending his brutality while I lay there in absolute shock and pain. They thought their public ambush would force my hand and break my spirit, but they had no idea that this was the exact moment their free, luxury ride on my money came to a permanent, freezing end. Sharing this painful story isn't easy, but your support means everything to me. Could you do me a quick favor? Let me know in the comments where you are watching from right now and what time it is over there. Your comments remind me that I am no longer alone. My name is Adeline. I am 30 years old, and if you had asked me a year ago who I was, I would have told you that I was a daughter and a sister first, and a human being second. I live in Charleston, South Carolina, a city built on old traditions, beautiful architecture, and deep-rooted family values. Growing up here, those values were drilled into my head every single day. I was taught that family loyalty wasn't just important, it was absolute. It was a sacred, unbreakable bond. I truly believed that as the oldest sibling, my ultimate purpose in life was to protect my family, to absorb their hardships, and to make sure they never stumbled, no matter how much it cost me personally. I was the daughter who never complained when my own dreams had to be put on hold. I was the sister who swallowed her pride, ignored the constant disrespect, and kept her head down just to keep the peace. I spent years building a reputation in this city for being fiercely reliable, exceptionally hardworking, and endlessly kind. People looked at me as a pillar of strength, a woman who could carry the weight of the world on her shoulders with a smile. But looking back, I realized that what I thought was unconditional love was actually just a deep, dangerous innocence. I was completely blind to the fact that the people I loved most didn't see me as a person. They saw me as a commodity. They saw me as an endless resource to be drained dry. I never could have imagined that the very people I sacrificed my youth to protect would look at me with absolute hatred simply because I wanted a life of my own. I never could have predicted that my own parents and brother would choose the absolute happiest day of my life to stage a ruthless ambush. But most of all, I never thought that my own flesh and blood would look at me lying bleeding on a wooden floor and choose to protect a criminal instead of his victim. The girl who entered that wedding hall was naive, driven by guilt, and desperate for approval. But that girl died on that floor. Let me tell you how it all started and how I made sure they paid every single debt they owed me. 7 years ago, my family hit rock bottom. My father lost his executive job at a local shipping firm, and within months, our savings vanished. As the bills piled up, panic took over our household. Instead of breaking down, I stepped up. I had always possessed a passion for fashion, an eye for fabric, and a relentless work ethic. I decided to start a custom clothing brand. I didn't have a fancy storefront or a massive loan. I just had a single sewing machine, a small table, and a burning desire to keep my family afloat. Those early years were a living nightmare of exhaustion. I worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. I taught myself advanced couture sewing techniques, spent hours negotiating with fabric suppliers, and handled every single client consultation myself. My fingers were constantly blistered and bleeding from hand-stitching intricate lace and heavy silk, but I never stopped. Slowly, my dedication paid off. Word of mouth spread across South Carolina, and my small project evolved into the most successful high-end bridal and fashion boutique in the heart of Charleston. As the boutique's profits soared, my role in the family shifted from a daughter to a financial slave. I became the sole provider for the entire household. Every month, my business paid the $3,200 mortgage on our large suburban family home. When my parents' health issues arose, my business immediately cleared their $15,000 medical debts. I paid for the groceries, the utilities, the property taxes, and the insurance. If anyone in the house needed anything, they didn't look for a job. They just looked for me. And then there was my younger brother, Pierce. Pierce was 24 years old, completely capable, and utterly toxic. He was the definition of a lazy, entitled parasite. He dropped out of community college because he claimed the professors were beneath his intelligence, and he refused to hold down a basic job for more than a few weeks. Instead of contributing to the household, he spent his days sleeping in, going to expensive bars, and living like a millionaire on my dime. Because I wanted to avoid constant arguments, I had made the massive mistake of issuing Pierce a secondary corporate credit card under my boutique's account for emergencies. Pierce used that card to buy designer clothes, expensive cologne, and a luxury gold watch. When I finally confronted him about a $4,000 monthly statement, he laughed in my face. When I went to my parents for help, they immediately blocked me. My mother patted Pierce's hand and looked at me with cold disappointment. "He is the only son, Adeline," she said, her voice dripping with manipulation. "He is a young man trying to find his path in a difficult world. You have a booming, highly profitable luxury business. It is your duty to share your blessings with your brother. Don't be greedy." My father simply nodded in agreement, stating that family does not keep score. I was trapped in a vicious cycle. I was burning myself out at the boutique, skipping meals, and working through illnesses to maintain a high-end luxury brand, while my brother used my sweat and blood to live a life of pure luxury. They completely minimized my intellect and my labor. To them, my business wasn't a testament to my talent. It was just a communal family asset that happened to have my name on it. I was drowning in silent resentment, completely exhausted and ready to break. And that was exactly when Gideon walked into my boutique, and for the very first time in my life, showed me what it felt like to be valued. Gideon walked into my boutique on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. He wasn't there to buy a bridal gown, of course. He was a freelance software consultant hired by a neighboring business, and he had accidentally walked into my shop looking for a corporate office space. We ended up talking for an hour over coffee. He was incredibly kind, soft-spoken, and possessed a quiet confidence that immediately put me at ease. For the first time in 7 years, someone didn't ask me what my business could do for them. Gideon just wanted to know about me, my passions, and how I managed to keep a smile on my face while running a major luxury brand. As we started dating, Gideon became my safe haven. He was the complete opposite of the toxic entitlement I faced at home. He was entirely independent, successful in his own right, and deeply respected my boundaries. When he saw me staying up until midnight trying to finish a custom order for a difficult client, he would quietly show up at the boutique with dinner, sit on the floor next to my sewing machine, and keep me company. He valued my mind, my talent, and my heart. When Gideon proposed to me a year later on a beautiful overlooking cliff in Charleston, he didn't hand me a massive flashy diamond meant to show off. He gave me a classic, elegant, vintage ring that he had carefully researched because he knew I appreciated historic craftsmanship. Tears streamed down my face as I said yes. For the first time, someone wanted to protect me. Someone wanted to give to me instead of constantly taking. But when I came home and announced the engagement, the reaction from my family was chilling. There were no hugs, no tears of joy, and no congratulations. The room went completely cold. My mother slowly put down her teacup, her eyes narrowing. "Marriage changes a woman's priorities, Adeline," she said coldly. "Are you going to forget about your own flesh and blood now that you have a husband?" Pierce didn't even look up from his phone. He just sneered. "I hope this tech guy doesn't think he's getting a cut of our boutique's profits. That business runs this house." Over the next 6 months, as I planned the wedding, the emotional manipulation escalated to a suffocating level. My parents and brother constantly dropped passive-aggressive comments at the dinner table. They accused me of planning to abandon them, of wanting to leave them homeless, and of being selfish for focusing on my new life with Gideon. They were utterly terrified that their free ride was coming to an end. They didn't care about my happiness or my love for Gideon. They only saw him as a threat to their unlimited ATM. I kept reassuring them that I would still help with necessities, but that wasn't enough for them. They didn't want help. They wanted absolute control. And as my wedding day approached, they secretly hatched a desperate, ruthless plan to lock that control in place forever. The morning of my wedding was a beautiful, sunlit day in Charleston, South Carolina. The Grand Plaza Hall was absolutely stunning. Thousands of tiny, warm fairy lights hung from the high ceilings, reflecting off the polished wooden dance floor. The tables were adorned with massive arrangements of fresh white roses, and the soft sound of a classical string quartet filled the air. Over 100 of the city's most prominent families, business owners, and local designers sat in the rows, chatting happily. I was wearing my absolute masterpiece, a custom silk and French lace bridal gown that I had spent 6 months personally designing and hand-stitching at my boutique. It was perfect. Gideon looked incredibly handsome in his tailored tuxedo. As the heavy grand doors opened, the crowd stood up, cheering and clapping. We smiled at each other, our hearts racing with pure joy, and began walking hand in hand down the center of the hall toward the main stage for our official reception. I felt a wave of peace wash over me. I believed that despite all the tension, the toxic arguments, and the manipulation, I had finally made it to my safe haven. But that peace lasted for exactly 10 seconds. Just as we reached the center of the dance floor, right in front of the stage and the main microphone, 3 figures abruptly stepped out from the side, blocking our path. It was my mother, my father, and my brother Pierce. The string quartet suddenly stopped playing. The cheers from the guests died down into a confused, heavy silence. I froze, my hand tightening around Gideon's. Pierce was dressed in an expensive suit, paid for by my business credit card, but his face was twisted in a cold, aggressive smirk. In his hands, he was holding a thick stack of legal documents and a heavy black pen. My mother stepped forward, her face completely void of any maternal warmth, and forced the documents into my hands. Before I could even open my mouth, Pierce grabbed the standing microphone, his voice echoing loudly through the entire silent hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, "Can I have your attention, please?" Pierce shouted, his voice dripping with malice. "We are very sorry for the interruption, but this wedding is not going to proceed any further today, not until a very important family matter is settled. Adeline, you are getting married and moving to another man's house. You think you're just going to walk away and take your boutique and its profits with you? No way. Right here, right now, in front of everyone, you are going to sign these papers. You are transferring 100% of the corporate ownership, the trademarks, and the legal rights of your fashion boutique over to me." A collective, shocked gasp rippled through the audience. People began whispering furiously, staring at us. My mother leaned in close to my face, her breath warm against my ear, but her voice was loud enough for the front row guests to hear clearly. "Sign the papers, Adeline. Do it right now and stop causing a scene. Gideon has more than enough money to provide for you. You are a married woman now. You don't need a business. This boutique belongs to your family. It belongs to the family heir. Don't ruin your own wedding over your disgusting greed." I stood there, surrounded by 100 staring eyes, holding the legal papers that would strip away my 7 years of agonizingly hard work. My hands began to shake. I looked at my father, expecting him to stop this madness, but he just stood there with his arms crossed, nodding his approval. They had intentionally planned this public ambush at the most high-stakes moment of my life, calculating that the sheer embarrassment and pressure of 100 high-profile guests would force me to break down and sign my life away. Gideon instantly stepped in front of me, his face pale with rage, pushing Pierce back. "This is completely insane. Get out of our way, Pierce. Step down right now before I have security throw you out of this building." But I couldn't let Gideon fight this battle alone. The burning realization of their absolute betrayal hit me like a physical blow. They didn't love me. They never did. They just wanted to keep me chained down as their slave. I gently but firmly pulled Gideon back. I stood up tall, looked my brother straight in his greedy eyes, and spoke directly into the open microphone. My voice didn't shake. It was pure steel. "No," I said, the word echoing through the grand hall. "I am not signing a single page. This boutique is my blood, my sweat, and my tears. I built it from absolute nothing while you sat on the couch wasting my money. I will not give my life's work to a lazy, pathetic thief. Get out of my wedding." My public rejection tore right through Pierce's fragile, narcissistic ego. To be called a lazy, pathetic thief in front of the most prominent families and business owners in Charleston was a humiliation he couldn't handle. His face turned an ugly, dark crimson. The greedy smirk vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unhinged malice. He dropped the microphone and it hit the floor with a deafening screech that made the guests cover their ears. Before anyone in that room could even process what was happening, Pierce lunged at me like a wild animal. He didn't care that I was his sister. He didn't care that it was my wedding day, or that 100 stunned witnesses were watching. He reached out, buried his fist deep into my styled wedding hair, twisting it tightly, and with full, violent force, he slammed me face first down onto the hard, wooden dance floor. The entire wedding hall erupted into absolute chaos and terrifying screams. My head hit the solid wood with a sickening, heavy thud. A blinding, white-hot flash of pain shot through my skull, and the world immediately started tilting. I lay there paralyzed, my cheek pressed against the cold floor, as a dark pool of blood began to seep from my hairline, instantly staining the pristine white silk of the bridal gown I had spent 6 months sewing by hand. Through the loud, ringing noise in my ears and my rapidly fading vision, I saw Gideon blur past me. He roared in pure fury, tackling Pierce to the ground, pinning him down with a heavy blow to the face. The guests were running, tables were being pushed over, and the fairy lights above seemed to spin out of control. But the most heartbreaking part wasn't the pain in my head. It was the voices. Through the fog of my consciousness, I heard my mother and father rushing forward. But they weren't dropping to their knees to check on me. They weren't trying to stop the bleeding on their daughter's head. Instead, my mother was screaming at the top of her lungs, hitting Gideon's back, trying to pull him off Pierce. "Get off him, you monster! Don't you dare touch my son! Leave him alone!" My father was yelling at the guests, loudly defending Pierce, shouting, "She provoked him! Adeline brought this on herself! She ruined this family with her greed!" They were actively shielding a violent criminal while their own daughter lay bleeding and semi-conscious on the floor. In that exact moment, as the metallic taste of blood filled my mouth, the final piece of my innocence died. The heartbroken, giving daughter who desperately wanted her parents' approval, drawing her last breath on that floor. The tears in my eyes froze into pure, unadulterated ice. I realized that being kind to monsters is just a slow form of suicide. I was done being a victim. Gideon didn't waste another second on Pierce. He crawled over to me, his hands shaking violently as he took off his tuxedo jacket and pressed it firmly against my bleeding forehead. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. With his other hand, he pulled out his phone and frantically dialed 911, putting it on speaker. "Emergency! I need police and paramedics at the Grand Plaza Hall immediately. Gideon screamed into the phone, his voice cracking with emotion. A bride has been brutally assaulted. She has been slammed into the ground. She is bleeding heavily from a head wound and losing consciousness. Please, send help now. Within less than 10 minutes, the piercing, wailing sirens of police cruisers and ambulances echoed outside, their flashing blue and red lights cutting through the grand glass windows of the hall. Paramedics rushed onto the dance floor with a heavy stretcher, putting an oxygen mask over my face and strapping me in. Gideon never let go of my hand. He climbed right into the back of the ambulance with me, whispering that I was safe now. As they rolled my stretcher out through the front doors, I forced my heavy eyelids open one last time. I saw 2 police officers violently twisting Pierce's arms behind his back, clicking cold, heavy metal handcuffs onto his wrists. And right beside him stood my parents, weeping bitterly, begging the officers to let him go, while pointing at the ambulance and cursing my name. I woke up in a sterile hospital room 48 hours later. The harsh fluorescent lights above hurt my eyes, and a steady, rhythmic beep from the heart monitor echoed in the quiet room. I reached up with a trembling hand to touch my forehead, feeling a thick layer of gauze covering 3 deep stitches right along my hairline. The doctor informed me that I had suffered a severe concussion, but I was incredibly lucky. The impact hadn't fractured my skull. Gideon was sitting in the plastic chair beside my bed, his eyes heavily bloodshot, his clothes still stained with my dried wedding blood. The moment he saw me open my eyes, he broke down, tightly gripping my hand. But I didn't cry. The pain in my head was nothing compared to the freezing, absolute determination that had taken over my soul. While I was resting, Gideon's phone had been buzzing continuously. There were dozens of text messages and voicemails from my parents. They weren't asking if I was alive. They were demanding, guilt-tripping, and ordering me to call the police to drop the charges. "Don't ruin your brother's life over a small mistake, Adeline," one text from my mother read. "If he goes to jail, it's on your conscience." That was the final straw. I looked at Gideon and said, "Call the detective." When the Charleston police detective entered my room, I gave a calm, unwavering statement. I made sure they knew every detail of the assault, and I officially handed over the wedding videographer's high-definition raw footage. It captured the entire attack clearly from 3 different angles, along with the shocked reactions of 100 eyewitnesses. I pressed full, maximum charges for aggravated assault and domestic violence, and I filed for a permanent, lifetime restraining order against Pierce. Once I was officially discharged from the hospital, I didn't go back to the family house. I checked into a quiet hotel with Gideon and immediately hired a heavy-hitting corporate defense attorney. It was time for my family's cold, systematic karma to begin. My parents thought they were safe because they hadn't physically laid a hand on me, but they forgot one massive legal detail. The large, beautiful suburban house they lived in was bought entirely with my boutique's revenue, and the property deed was registered exclusively under my name. I instructed my lawyer to draft an official, legally binding 30-day eviction notice. Next, I severed their financial lifelines completely. I logged into my business bank portals and instantly canceled the secondary corporate credit cards I had mistakenly given to Pierce. I stopped the automatic monthly allowance transfers to my parents' personal accounts, removed them completely from my boutique's luxury corporate health insurance plan, and ceased making payments on the expensive SUV Pierce drove. Within less than a week, the bank sent a tow truck and repossessed the vehicle right from the driveway. 2 days later, my parents showed up at the glass doors of my boutique, weeping, desperate, and completely frantic. They weren't allowed inside because my staff had strict orders, so they stood on the pavement, banging on the glass, screaming through the doors. "Adeline, please, we are your parents," my mother wailed, her face covered in tears. "We will be completely homeless. We have no money to survive without your business. Have some mercy." I walked slowly to the glass doors, looking at them with total detachment. I didn't feel a single ounce of guilt. I spoke through the intercom system, my voice freezing cold. "You stood over my bleeding body and defended the monster who cracked my skull open. Since Pierce is your priority, you can rely on him to pay your bills now. Do not ever come near me or my business again." 3 months later, I sat in the front row of the Charleston criminal courtroom, holding Gideon's hand tightly. The final verdict was a brutal reality check for my brother. Because of the overwhelming video evidence, the medical records detailing my head trauma, and the fact that the assault took place in a crowded public venue, the judge showed absolutely no mercy. Pierce was convicted of felony aggravated assault and domestic violence, and he was sentenced to 4 years in state prison with 0 chance of early parole. His criminal record is permanently ruined, and his luxury life has been traded for a cold, gray cell. My parents received a completely realistic, crushing punishment. The law could not send them to jail because they hadn't physically attacked me, but the financial and social reality hit them worse than any prison sentence ever could. The 30-day eviction notice was finalized by the court, forcing them to pack their belongings and leave my property. With no credit, no boutique allowance, and no financial support from me, they were forced to downsize to a tiny, run-down, one-bedroom apartment in a cheap, neglected district of the state. My 60-year-old father, who hadn't worked a single day in 7 years, was forced to take a physically grueling night shift security job just to afford basic groceries and utilities. They are left completely isolated, trapped in the very poverty they tried to exploit me to avoid. The high society friends they tried so hard to impress at the wedding now avoid them like the plague. As for me and Gideon, we didn't let the trauma ruin our love or our future. 2 weeks ago, after the legal dust finally settled and the scar on my forehead had faded into a faint line, we had our real wedding. There was no massive, expensive hall, no fake family smiles, and absolutely no drama. We went to a beautiful, secluded beach in South Carolina at sunset. I wore a simple white linen dress, and Gideon wore a relaxed cream suit. There were no flashing cameras or hundreds of guests, just a local judge, 5 of our absolute closest, truest friends, and the sound of the ocean waves crashing against the shore. As Gideon slid a simple band onto my finger under the open, golden sky, I felt a deep, overwhelming sense of peace. For the first time in my 30 years of life, I am truly free. My fashion boutique is thriving under my absolute control, my husband loves me for exactly who I am, and the toxic parasites who tried to break me are exactly where they belong. Karma always collects its debts, and it always delivers justice. Looking back at that scar on my forehead, I don't feel anger anymore. I just feel peace. It took a heartbreaking betrayal on what should have been the happiest day of my life to realize that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for survival. I chose myself, I chose justice, and I let karma handle the rest. But living through this made me think about how many others might be suffering in silence just to keep the peace. So I want to ask you, do you think I did the right thing by evicting my parents, or did I go too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if my journey brought you any value today, please subscribe and hit the bell icon to join our community for daily stories. Thank you for listening.